My MIL tried to control my life. I gave her a lesson she'll never forget. Hi, welcome back to my channel. Please subscribe, and don't forget to press the bell icon for upcoming more interesting videos.
My name is Rachel Turner. I am 32 years old and I live in Chicago, Illinois, and when I married my husband Daniel, I believed I was starting a new chapter filled with excitement, stability, and the normal adjustments that come with building a life together. Daniel and I had known each other for several years before we decided to get married, and during that time our relationship always felt balanced and supportive. He was calm, thoughtful, and hardworking, while I had always been someone who valued independence and organization. So when we finally moved into our own home after the wedding, I imagined that the biggest challenges ahead of us would be things like balancing work schedules, managing finances, and slowly creating a comfortable routine together. However, very early into our marriage, I began noticing something that I had underestimated before: the influence of Daniel's mother, Linda. She had always been present during family gatherings, but while we were dating, her behavior had seemed like nothing more than the normal protectiveness some parents feel toward their children. At first, I believed she simply wanted to stay involved in her son's life, and I tried to respect that relationship. But after the wedding, her involvement quickly became something very different. Linda began appearing in our daily life far more often than I expected. Sometimes she would visit our home several times in a single week, always arriving with strong opinions about how things should be done. She rarely asked questions in a curious way. Instead, she spoke as if she already knew the correct answer to every situation. When she stepped into our kitchen, she immediately began commenting on how I organized the cabinets or how certain meals should be prepared. If she noticed something arranged differently from the way she preferred, she would start explaining what she believed was the proper method, as if the house still belonged to her. I tried to remain polite because I understood that adjusting to a new family dynamic could take time, and I did not want to create unnecessary tension, especially so early in our marriage. But over the following weeks, it became clear that Linda's behavior was not temporary. She seemed to believe that every part of our life required her guidance and approval. When Daniel and I discussed work schedules or weekend plans, she often inserted herself into the conversation, offering instructions about what she believed would be best. Even decisions as simple as how we decorated the living room became opportunities for her to criticize the choices I made. She would compare my style to the way she had always arranged her own house, explaining that certain colors, furniture placements, or decorations looked better according to her experience. Although the comments were sometimes delivered with a smile, the meaning behind them always felt the same, as if she believed I was constantly making mistakes that needed correction. The most uncomfortable moments happened during family gatherings when several relatives were present at once. During those occasions, Linda often brought up stories from Daniel's past, including memories of his former relationships. She described how previous girlfriends had certain skills or habits that she admired, while looking directly at me as if expecting me to understand the comparison. The rest of the family usually reacted with polite silence, which only made the situation feel more awkward. Each time it happened, I reminded myself that maintaining peace inside the family was important, and I continued trying to handle the situation with patience, believing that eventually Linda might begin to trust me and allow Daniel and me to manage our own life the way every married couple should. However, as the months passed, her involvement only grew stronger. She began calling Daniel frequently to ask about our decisions, and sometimes appeared at the house without warning just to check how things were going. In her mind, these actions probably seemed helpful, but from my perspective, they slowly turned our home into a place where privacy felt fragile. I began noticing how even simple daily routines changed whenever she appeared unexpectedly, because the atmosphere inside the house shifted from calm to tense the moment her voice filled the room. Despite all of this, I still tried to remain respectful because I knew Daniel cared deeply about his mother, and I did not want to place him in a situation where he felt forced to choose sides. But deep down, I also knew that every relationship requires boundaries in order To stay healthy, and as time passed, Linda's behavior started crossing lines that made it harder for me to stay silent. Eventually, one particular moment arrived when her actions went far beyond casual interference and forced me to realize that if I wanted peace in my own home, I could no longer pretend that everything was normal. As time passed, after that realization, Linda's behavior became even more noticeable in our daily life, and what once felt like occasional interference slowly turned into something that affected nearly every part of my routine. One of the biggest problems was how frequently she began appearing at our home without any warning. At first, it happened only once or twice, but eventually it became common for her to arrive in the middle of the afternoon or early evening, sometimes using the spare key she insisted Daniel should give her because she believed parents should always have access to their children's homes. Every time she walked in, she behaved as if she were entering a place that still belonged to her rather than a house Daniel and I were building together. She moved through the rooms, observing everything with a critical eye, noticing small details that most people would never even think about. If she saw something placed differently than she preferred, she would begin rearranging it immediately, sometimes shifting decorations on the shelves, moving kitchen items to different cabinets, or adjusting furniture in ways that made the house feel unfamiliar to me. More than once, I returned from work to discover that objects I used every day were no longer where I had left them because Linda had decided the arrangement needed improvement. While she often described these changes as helpful advice, the constant adjustments slowly created the feeling that my own home was no longer fully under my control. What made the situation more difficult was Daniel's reaction to his mother's behavior. He loved her deeply and had grown up with her strong personality, so many of her actions seemed normal to him. Whenever I tried to explain how uncomfortable the situation made me, he listened carefully but often struggled to confront her directly. Instead, he suggested that she probably meant well and that perhaps we simply needed to be patient while she adjusted to the idea that he was now married. I understood his position because confronting a parent can be emotionally complicated, yet the longer the situation continued, the more I felt alone in dealing with it. Linda also began influencing decisions that should have belonged only to Daniel and me. Holidays became one of the clearest examples. Whenever we discussed how we wanted to spend certain weekends, she would immediately begin describing her expectations about family gatherings, dinners, and traditions that she believed should continue exactly as they had in the past. Even simple plans like taking a short trip or visiting friends required careful explanation because she often reacted as if we were ignoring family responsibilities. If our choices did not match her preferences, she would express disappointment in ways that made the entire conversation uncomfortable. Over time, I began noticing a pattern behind all of these situations. Linda rarely considered that Daniel and I might want to build our own routines. Instead, she treated our marriage as if it were simply an extension of the life she had already organized for her son. The more I observed her behavior, the clearer it became that her involvement was less about helping and more about maintaining control. She liked knowing what decisions were being made and preferred to guide them whenever possible. Even small things such as grocery shopping or weekend schedules became topics where she offered detailed instructions about what she believed we should do. While these moments might seem minor when viewed individually, together they created constant pressure inside our home. Eventually, I realized that waiting for the situation to improve on its own was not going to solve anything. The respect I hoped would naturally develop between us never appeared because Linda had no reason to change the pattern. She believed her actions were normal, and Daniel continued trying to avoid conflict rather than setting clear boundaries. One evening, after another unexpected visit left me feeling frustrated and exhausted, I finally accepted something important. Continuing to argue directly with Linda would likely lead only to louder disagreements and deeper tension within the family. If I wanted the situation to change, I needed a different approach, one that would show the reality of her behavior without turning every interaction into an open fight. That realization slowly began forming an idea in my mind, because sometimes the most Powerful way to address control is not through confrontation but through allowing others to see the truth of the situation for themselves. And as I started paying closer attention to Linda habits and the way she behaved around other relatives, I began noticing a weakness in her carefully controlled image that gave me the beginning of a plan I believed could finally change everything after realizing that direct arguments would probably only create more tension inside the family. I began observing Linda's behavior more carefully than before. Instead of reacting every time she criticized something or tried to control a decision, I stepped back and paid attention to the patterns behind her actions. It did not take long for me to notice that her attitude often changed depending on who was present when she spoke to me. When we were alone inside the house, she was confident, direct, and quick to explain what she believed I should be doing differently, but during larger family gatherings, she behaved very differently. She spoke in a calm, friendly tone and presented herself as someone who only wanted the best for everyone. She enjoyed being seen as organized, responsible, and supportive, and the other relatives usually believed that image because they rarely witnessed the controlling side of her personality that I experienced during her unexpected visits to our home. The more I thought about this difference, the more I realized that her reputation inside the family was something she valued deeply. She liked being respected and admired as the person who kept everything running smoothly during holidays and celebrations, and because of that, she carefully protected the impression people had of her personality. This realization slowly became the center of my plan. If Linda cared so much about maintaining the appearance of being helpful and reasonable, then the most effective lesson would not come from confronting her privately, but from allowing others to see how she actually behaved when she believed she was in complete control. The opportunity to test this idea appeared when Daniel's family began discussing plans for a large gathering that would bring several relatives together. It was meant to be a relaxed event where everyone could share a meal, spend time talking, and enjoy the afternoon together. As soon as the idea was mentioned, Linda immediately volunteered to organize many of the details. She began explaining how the decorations should look, what food should be prepared, and what schedule the day should follow. Normally, I would have tried to defend my own ideas about how the event should be arranged, but this time I chose a different approach. Instead of challenging her, I agreed with everything she suggested and encouraged her to take the lead. Daniel seemed surprised by my sudden cooperation because he had often seen me become frustrated during earlier situations where his mother tried to control the arrangements. However, I simply told him that perhaps allowing her to handle things would make the gathering easier for everyone. What I did not explain was that I was already thinking several steps ahead. Over the next few days, Linda continued planning the event with great enthusiasm. She called Daniel frequently to confirm small details and often visited the house to make sure everything would be ready exactly the way she preferred. During those visits, I remained calm and supportive. Even when she began rearranging decorations or adjusting the kitchen again, her confidence grew stronger because she believed she had finally convinced me to accept her way of doing things. But while she focused on perfecting the plan, I quietly prepared the house to ensure that the event would unfold naturally without interference from me. I knew that if Linda truly controlled every aspect of the gathering, the pressure of managing so many details at once might reveal the demanding side of her personality, especially with several relatives present to observe it. The day of the gathering eventually arrived, bringing with it a mixture of excitement and quiet anticipation. As family members began arriving, the house filled with conversation, laughter, and the sounds of people greeting each other warmly. Linda moved through the rooms, quickly checking decorations, adjusting small details, and making sure everything looked exactly the way she had imagined. At first, the atmosphere felt pleasant and relaxed, but as more guests arrived, the responsibilities she had taken on began growing heavier. Food needed to be served, tables needed to be arranged, and questions from different relatives started coming at the same time. Instead of stepping in to manage these situations myself, I simply allowed the process to unfold naturally, watching quietly as Linda attempted to keep everything under her control without realizing that for the first time the entire family was present to see how she handled pressure, and in that moment I understood that the plan I had carefully prepared was finally beginning to reveal the truth that had remained hidden for so long. As the gathering continued, the house slowly became busier, with relatives moving between the kitchen and living room. While conversations filled the air at the beginning, everything appeared calm and well organized, and Linda moved confidently through the house, making small adjustments to decorations, checking the food, and reminding everyone about the schedule she had carefully planned. However, as more people arrived, the number of small responsibilities she had taken on started increasing faster than she expected. Different relatives asked questions about where to place dishes when the meal would begin and how the tables should be arranged because Linda had insisted on controlling every detail earlier. Everyone naturally looked to her for answers instead of stepping in to solve these situations myself. I quietly continued helping with simple tasks while allowing her to remain in charge. The more she tried to manage everything at once, the more difficult it became for her to keep the calm, friendly image she usually presented during family events. Soon her patience began to fade as the pressure of organizing the entire gathering alone started showing through her tone and body language. Relatives who had always believed she handled these events effortlessly now watched as she hurried from one room to another, correcting small things repeatedly and expressing frustration when something did not happen exactly the way she expected. The first noticeable moment happened when the arrangement of the dining table did not match the layout she had imagined earlier. She quickly began moving chairs and dishes while explaining that things needed to be done correctly, but several relatives looked surprised by the intensity of her reaction because to them the arrangement seemed perfectly acceptable. Similar moments continued appearing throughout the afternoon. Each time something small required attention, Linda responded with visible irritation instead of the calm, helpful attitude she normally displayed. The more these situations happened, the more people began noticing the pattern I had been dealing with for months. Family members who had rarely spent extended time around her started exchanging quiet glances when they saw how easily she became controlling about even the smallest details. The gathering itself continued successfully, with everyone eventually enjoying the meal and spending time talking together, but the atmosphere had changed in a subtle way. The relatives who once saw Linda only as the organized host now understood that her need to manage everything came with a demanding side that could quickly turn tense whenever she felt something slipping out of her control. Throughout the evening, I remained calm and supportive, helping wherever it was needed without challenging her authority or creating open conflict. My goal had never been to embarrass her, but simply to allow the truth of the situation to appear naturally, and by the time the gathering began winding down, it was clear that several relatives had quietly recognized what had been happening inside our home. For so long, conversations became more balanced as other family members started stepping forward to help with small tasks rather than automatically waiting for Linda instructions, which seemed to surprise her because she was used to being the person everyone followed. The shift in dynamic was subtle but meaningful. For the first time, the responsibility of controlling every detail no longer rested completely in her hands. When the last guests prepared to leave, the evening ended peacefully, but the impression left behind was very different from previous gatherings. Linda appeared quieter and less certain of herself as she finished tidying small things around the house, and I could see that she understood something important had changed. Without a single argument or confrontation, the family had seen the demanding side of her personality that usually remained hidden behind polite smiles and careful words. As I watched the final moments of the evening unfold, I realized that sometimes the most powerful way to change a situation is simply allowing reality to reveal itself. And now that everyone had witnessed the truth about how control affected the atmosphere around her, the balance inside our family was already beginning to shift in a direction that would be difficult for anyone to ignore. After the gathering ended and the last relatives left the house, the atmosphere felt Noticeably different from the way it had been before the event, the evening had passed without any loud arguments or direct confrontations, yet the change in family dynamics was impossible to ignore. Throughout the entire gathering, several relatives had quietly witnessed the demanding side of Linda's personality that usually remained hidden behind her calm public image, and once people see something clearly, it becomes very difficult to pretend it never happened. In the days that followed the event, I noticed subtle but meaningful shifts in the way Linda behaved around me. She no longer arrived at the house as frequently as before, and when she did visit, her tone carried a different kind of caution. Instead of immediately moving through the rooms and rearranging things, she began asking small questions about how Daniel and I preferred to organize our home. These moments were quiet and simple, but they showed that the balance of control inside our relationship had changed for the first time. Since the beginning of my marriage, I felt that my space was being acknowledged rather than constantly adjusted according to someone else's expectations. Daniel also began recognizing the difference. He had attended the gathering and witnessed the same moments everyone else had seen during the evening. He noticed how easily the situation became tense when his mother tried to manage every detail, and how the atmosphere relaxed once other relatives stepped in to help share the responsibility. This realization helped him understand the pressure I had been describing for months without needing another difficult conversation. He started supporting me more openly when decisions about our home or schedule needed to be made. Instead of avoiding those situations, he calmly reminded his mother that our plans were something we would decide together. These responses were respectful but clear, and over time they helped reinforce the boundaries that had previously been missing. Linda seemed to understand that continuing her old habits would only create the same uncomfortable situations the family had already witnessed during the gathering, so she gradually adjusted the way she interacted with us. When family events were planned, she still offered suggestions, but she no longer insisted on controlling every detail. The atmosphere during those gatherings became lighter because responsibilities were shared instead of directed by one person. Relatives participated more naturally, and conversations flowed more comfortably without the constant pressure of meeting strict expectations. The house that once felt tense whenever she visited slowly returned to being the peaceful place Daniel and I had imagined when we first moved in together. Looking back on the entire experience, I realized that the lesson Linda learned did not come from embarrassment or anger, but from awareness. Sometimes people continue certain behaviors simply because no one has ever allowed them to see how those actions affect others. Once the reality becomes visible, change can happen without forcing it through arguments. My goal had never been to damage the relationship with my mother-in-law, but to create space where respect and balance could exist, and in the end that goal was achieved through patience rather than confrontation. The experience also reminded me that healthy boundaries are an essential part of every family connection, even when those boundaries feel difficult to establish at first. Daniel and I continued building our life together with a stronger understanding of how important it is to protect the balance inside our home while still maintaining relationships with the people around us. And although Linda remained an important part of the family, her role slowly shifted from someone who controlled every detail to someone who participated alongside everyone else. With time, the tension that once filled our interactions faded into a more comfortable rhythm, proving that sometimes the strongest lessons are the ones people discover on their own when the truth of their behavior becomes impossible to overlook.